The unblemished cream envelope lay centered on the polished mahogany table, an insidious beacon demanding attention, a silent threat that needed no words. For a fleeting second, I froze. This was it, our familiar weekly strategy meeting. Same room, same early hour, same acrid aroma of the office coffee. Yet, today, the usual buzz was absent. No one else materialized. Just him. Asher Langston, occupying the head of the table like an undeserved throne. His crisp suit seemed tailored for smugness, his perpetually half-smirk a signature of his irritating, evasive eye contact. CEO's son-in-law, a mere 6 months married, inexplicably promoted 2 weeks prior. His resume was a blank slate where systems architecture, patent filings, or even basic tech experience should have been. Yet here he was, delivering the end of my 23 years at Stravara, neatly packaged in a single, beige-toned envelope. "This isn't personal, Elena," he murmured, his voice a soft, almost apologetic drone. "We're just restructuring. Legacy roles." Legacy roles. The phrase hung in the air, a contemptuous euphemism for redundancy. I had architected the very digital bedrock upon which Stravara was built. Its intricate architecture, its fail-safes, its entire digital bloodline, all my design. I had written lines of code from hospital waiting rooms, signed critical contracts between eulogies. I was the first employee to arrive when we snagged series of funding and the last to leave when the market turned, and our funding threatened to collapse. Now, I was a legacy. Not even the decency of a conversation, not a perfunctory thank you, certainly not the CEO himself showing up to deliver the blow. Just Asher, with his feigned softness and chilling efficiency, acting as if this were a mere spreadsheet correction. He leaned back, a subtle gesture that implied finality. But in that instant, something profound shifted within me. I truly looked at him, not at the gleaming wedding ring, not at the resume padded with vacuous buzzwords, but at him. He didn't know the product. He didn't know the critical protocols. He couldn't even locate where the core system backups resided. But he knew who he married. And in this building, it was undeniably enough. I said nothing. My hand, despite a slight tremor, slipped the envelope into my bag. A smile touched my lips, thin and precise. It wasn't a genuine smile. It was the kind one wears when someone mistakes your life's singular dedication for mere overhead. The kind that screams, "You have no earthly idea what you have just touched." As I walked out, my reflection caught in the glass walls. Straight back, pressed blouse, and 30,000 hours of intellectual brilliance reduced to a mere line item on a cost-cutting ledger. But what he didn't know was that the system he had so blithely tried to seize was never truly theirs to begin with. The hallways smelled of sterile hand sanitizer and the faint, lingering scent of burnt coffee. The day I signed while my mother was dying. Monitors around me chimed with a steady, haunting rhythm, the metallic symphony of machines standing vigil over the fading. This was the place where I first signed the initial schematic of Ravex, the oncology wing, 3rd floor, Mercy Hill Medical Center. My mother was dying 3 doors down. It was 10 years ago, almost to the day. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her voice was a fragile whisper, her skin translucent against the white sheets. When I told her I was heading to the lab to finalize the blueprint, she clutched my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and whispered, "Finish it here." So I did. I opened my laptop in the hushed corridor, balancing it precariously on my knees, and began reviewing the final schematic. The architecture was raw, elegantly unstable, mirroring the turmoil within me. The attorney emailed the temporary filing form. I typed my full legal name, Elena Hartwell, the name on my birth certificate, the name etched onto my mother's medical records, and clicked sign. I remember looking up, her gaze meeting mine from the doorway, her foreline trailing behind her like a silken tether. "There," she'd said, her voice barely audible, a profound benediction. "Now it's yours." She passed the next morning. I never uttered a word of it at the office. Not to the CEO, not to legal. I returned to work the day after the funeral. I buried myself in deadlines, clinging to the naive belief that every sacrifice made me stronger, that loyalty was an impenetrable armor. I convinced myself that if I gave enough of myself, Missed enough birthdays, declined enough enticing job offers, sat silently through enough meetings where younger, less experienced men took credit for my lines of code. I would become undeniable. But I was catastrophically wrong. 2 days prior, I was labeled non-essential. Yesterday, they archived my staff login. This morning, I was handed a beige envelope by a man who genuinely believes blockchain is a fantastical sci-fi concept. I had dedicated 23 years to Stravara. I was there before we had a logo, before a website, back when the lab's insulation peeled from the walls, and we used heat guns to coax the servers through winter. Now, I was a mere line item in a spreadsheet, a bureaucratic redundancy. They didn't know where Ravex was signed. They didn't know what it cost me. They only knew its perceived worth today. But value isn't always visible on paper. Sometimes, it's buried in a hospital hallway, in a dying mother's last breath, and in the name you never expected to need again. Elena Hartwell. The name on the patent. The one they had utterly forgotten. The Harvard man with a wedding ring. There exists a singular breed of man who enters a room as if the very air owes him deference. Asher Langston was the epitome of this type. He hadn't earned his place at Stravara. He had married into it a mere 6 months prior. Within 2 weeks, he had transmuted into the CEO's golden son-in-law, subsequently appointed Chief Strategy Officer, a title no one had ever heard of, yet one that granted him unfettered access to meetings he utterly failed to grasp and decisions he was profoundly unqualified to make. He possessed the immaculate sheen of a man who outsourced his pitch decks. Tailored suits, a Harvard MBA, a face meticulously sculpted for PR photographs. Yet, beneath this polished facade, I detected a profound intellectual vacuity that reverberated every time he opened his mouth. I vividly recall the first meeting he led. It was a Thursday morning, the full tech staff present, whiteboards brimming with intricate diagrams, real-time dashboards streaming across every monitor. And then, with an astonishing lack of self-awareness, he asked, "Have we considered building an operating system that can feel emotions?" The room plunged into a profound, suffocating silence. Someone coughed, a desperate attempt to break the tension. One of the engineers blinked, as if convinced he'd misheard. My gaze fixed on Asher, desperately searching for the punchline. There was none. We weren't developing AI therapy bots. We were meticulously crafting secure, scalable systems for critical global infrastructure. The closest we came to emotions was error flagging. When something breaks, it yells. But Asher believed tech should feel, and apparently, his feelings were now the inexplicable driving force behind the entire company's strategy. He had never coded a single line, never personally navigated a product launch, never endured a midnight vigil troubleshooting a rollback issue or haggling server load with an irate global vendor. But he possessed the ring. And in this company, that was sufficient. I learned to observe him with meticulous care, not out of respect, but from a growing, gnawing distrust of what he might dismantle next. He didn't perceive legacy systems. He saw cumbersome roadblocks. He didn't see seasoned, dedicated engineers. He saw inflated overhead. And the most galling aspect? He smiled through it all, as if reckless disruption were the highest virtue and loyalty a quaint relic of a bygone era. So, when I sat across from him with that envelope between us, I didn't just feel insulted. I felt fundamentally endangered. Men like Asher don't merely cut costs. They recklessly dismantle vital foundations without the slightest comprehension of what those foundations are actually supporting. And when the inevitable collapse occurs, they will invariably blame the very architects. He believed I was the past, but in truth, I was the only thing still holding his precarious present together. The hidden signature, Hartwell. There's a quiet, inherent power in reclaiming who you were before they attempted to redefine you. Long before I became Elena Brooks, Senior Systems Lead, I was Elena Hartwell. That was the name my mother whispered when I clinched first place at my inaugural science fair. The name meticulously printed on my college thesis. The name scribbled on every nascent R&D sketch in the margins of my lab notebooks. I never allowed that name to vanish. Not legally. Not professionally. 10 years ago, just after the first RaveX prototype achieved its initial functional stability, my mentor, a former IP attorney turned astute consultant, invited me to lunch. Her conversation steered clear of licensing clauses or patent specifics. Instead, she spoke of people, of power dynamics. "They'll thank you until you're inconvenient," she'd said, her eyes piercingly wise. "Then they'll forget you were ever a part of it. So if that day comes, make sure they don't need your name. Make sure they need your signature." That very night, I filed the necessary paperwork to establish an LLC within a jurisdiction renowned for its rock-solid intellectual property protection. I diligently registered every single design element, every foundational core framework, every intricate encryption structure, and every biometric interface under one meticulously chosen entity, Hartwell Dynamics. Its sole owner, Elena Hartwell. I never breathed a word of this to anyone at Stravara. Why would I? They never bothered to ask. They were far too preoccupied slapping their corporate logos onto my meticulously crafted code and attaching superfluous middle managers to my team like parasitic barnacles. I simply continued to deliver. And they, in their blissful ignorance, continued to assume. 3 years later, when I married and updated my name on the company payroll, no one from the legal department, not a single soul, requested an update on my prior filings. They blithely assumed the company owned the work because I had created it while employed. None of them, not one, had bothered to meticulously read the original provisional application. None of them knew that the earliest codebase, version 0.9 alpha, had been submitted before I even signed my full-time employment offer. So I let them assume. And I quietly kept building. There were moments, I confess, when I questioned if this foresight was merely a symptom of paranoia. After all, I was profoundly loyal. I believed deeply in the company, in its ambitious mission, in the integrity of the team. I endured 4 brutal rounds of layoffs. I patiently trained managers who would eventually outrank me. I even declined 2 lucrative CTO offers from rival firms. But that name, Hartwell, remained indelible, etched in ink, not merely memory. And now, as I sit on my balcony, the unopened envelope resting beside me like a forgotten relic, I feel no trace of panic. They had cut me out of the system, certainly. But they had utterly neglected to verify who truly owned the system. When they eventually go looking for control, they will discover a profound, unfillable gap in the chain. And in that very gap sits my name. Quiet. Legal. Immutable. Not out of spite, but out of absolute foresight. Out of unyielding control. Would you betray the house you built? It was a quiet Tuesday when the audacious message landed in my inbox. A polite email, its subject line simply reading, "Request for confidential conversation." Sender, Betrayal Tech. I stared at it for a full 10 minutes without clicking. Betrayal. Stravara's oldest, most formidable rival. The company against whom we had fiercely competed for every federal contract, every innovation grant, every coveted headline. For years, we had meticulously tracked their patents, painstakingly dissected their language, and anticipated their every move like players in a long, silent game of strategic chess. In public, we maintained a facade of mutual disregard. In private, we constructed entire contingency strategies around their every perceived weakness. And now, they wanted to talk to me. I finally opened the email. It was direct, professional, and astonishingly respectful. They had compelling reason to believe that I, and not Stravara, held the underlying, foundational rights to the RaveX core system. And if that proved true, they were prepared to discuss a full, exclusive licensing agreement, with additional options for strategic advisory. No threats, no legal posturing. Just one resonant line near the bottom. If you are, in fact, the rightful architect, we believe you should be the one deciding where your legacy goes next. My first reaction wasn't excitement. It was a wave of profound nausea. I closed the laptop abruptly and stood, pacing the small confines of my kitchen. The crushing weight of the past 2 decades pressed in, thick and suffocating like humid air. Stravara had consumed my life. I had brought RaveX to life on a single whiteboard, fought for every inch of its development when our CTO deemed it too risky and finance declared the model too theoretical. I had championed it, not for personal profit, but because I believed, with every fiber of my being, that it could fundamentally change how we protected critical infrastructure worldwide. Now, I was being presented with an opportunity to hand it over to our biggest competitor. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was an existential crisis of identity. Who was I now? A disgraced employee? A silent architect? A traitor? Was protecting my life's work a betrayal, or was allowing them to utterly ruin it the true sacrilege? I sat back down, reopening the message. They weren't asking me to destroy Stravara. They were asking me to choose what Ravex would become, and under whose principled leadership it would evolve. And the inescapable truth was this: Stravara wasn't Stravara anymore. Not the place I had helped build, not the team I had bled for. Now it was led by individuals who spoke only the superficial language of buzzwords, who valued ephemeral trends over foundational architecture, who fired their chief engineer over a cup of coffee without so much as bothering to verify where the very foundation of their enterprise had been laid. It wasn't the house I built anymore. It was someone else's fragile facade, resting precariously on blueprints they had never bothered to read. I took a long, steadying breath, clicked reply, and began to type a single, concise sentence. If we're going to talk, we talk in person. Because I wasn't merely negotiating a contract. I was deciding what deserved to endure and what unequivocally deserved to fall. Clause 11.3. No sale without her. The silence that settled in my apartment that afternoon was a different kind of quiet. Not the stunned stillness of betrayal, nor the aching, hollow pause of grief. It was a calculated, spacious calm, akin to the precise interval between two chess moves when one player, with a dawning chill, realizes they have just walked directly into a meticulously laid trap. Except this time, I was the one poised, holding the next, decisive piece. I sat at my desk, my tea long since gone cold beside me, with 3 critical documents open on my screen: the original Ravex provisional patent filing, the core licensing framework for Hartwell Dynamics, and a pristine scanned PDF of the intellectual property licensing agreement that Stravara itself had signed way back in 2015. It had been years since I last needed to consult these files, not because I had forgotten them, but because I had never, until this very moment, been compelled to prove anything. Most companies, I knew, grew complacent with their contracts once a product gained traction. They blithely assumed their control was absolute, particularly if the person who built the system was still diligently showing up to work on time and quietly fixing things before anyone even noticed they were broken. Stravara was no different. They mistook my ongoing support for passive, unquestioning loyalty. They never grasped that every single bit of access I granted, every line of maintenance, every consultation, was a conscious courtesy, not an inherent default. I scrolled methodically to page 14 of the agreement. Subsection C, Legal Considerations in Successor Licensing. And there it was, still perfectly intact, as ironclad as the day it was drafted. Clause 11.3, titled Non-Transferability Without Original Architect Consent. Its language was incisive, unequivocal. No licensing rights, derivative works, integrations, subdistributions, sublicensing agreements, or vendor transfer arrangements concerning the Ravex core system may be executed, renewed, or expanded without written approval and verified biometric authorization from the original system architect as defined in Article 2.1, hereinafter listed as Elena Hartwell. I stared at the text for a long, quiet moment. Not out of surprise, but from a profound sense of satisfaction at how impeccably it had held. This was a clause I had meticulously drafted myself in 2015, long before the executive team had even begun to grasp the true commercial potential of Ravex. At the time, they had been positively thrilled that I cared enough to meticulously handle the arcane legal details. Not a single person had redlined it. No one had flagged it. They had been too utterly consumed by the frantic chase for Series B funding. Now, that precise clause was a loaded weapon. Should they attempt to resell Reliance or expand the deployment of Ravex without my explicit consent, every single subsequent contract would be instantly invalidated upon signature. It wasn't just a legal snag, it was a devastating kill switch, meticulously wrapped in labyrinthine legal language and buried beneath 2 decades of their monumental corporate arrogance. And the most exquisite part? They had no earthly idea it even existed. They had never bothered to revisit the original agreement. They had blindly assumed ownership was simply about name recognition and salary bands, not about binding, immutable legal structure. They truly believed that firing me would irrevocably remove me from the system. But systems, real systems, the ones built to endure, simply don't function that way. I leaned back, clicked save on the updated review copy. My pulse was steady, a slow, deliberate beat. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't mourning. I was simply ready. Because the only thing more dangerous than a woman who has been systematically underestimated is one who vividly remembers every word she ever wrote. 10 o'clock Monday, one signature. The rain had ceased just moments before I stepped from the car. The sidewalk still glistened, a mirror catching the soft, diffused reflections of the Verilia Tech building. It was sleek, undeniably modern, understated. Not ostentatious like Stravara's sprawling headquarters, but purposeful, as if built for people who truly understood the intrinsic value of what transpired within its walls, rather than merely how it appeared from the outside. Precisely 10 a.m. Monday morning. I walked through the automatic sliding glass doors with nothing but a slim, elegant leather folder clutched in my hand. No entourage. No lawyers. No PR representatives. Just me. The receptionist, impeccably briefed, greeted me with a polite deference that suggested they knew my shoe size. I was escorted through 2 layers of discreet security checkpoints, ascended to the executive floor, and led into a conference room with walls of tempered glass, radiating an almost sacred silence. No gaudy branding. No unnecessary theatrics. Inside, a single folder rested on the polished table. Beside it, 2 men, Verilia's general counsel and their head of strategic development, rose to greet me, both sharing the same expression, focused intent without a hint of force. They made no attempt to win me over, for they inherently understood they didn't have to. I sat, opened the folder, and began to read. The licensing agreement was impeccably clean, surgically precise, exclusive rights to the Ravex core. Fully attributed to Hartwell Dynamics. A total contract value of $920 million over 10 years. And a non-negotiable clause, no derivative alterations to the original architecture without written approval from the chief technical steward, listed boldly, unequivocally, Elena Hartwell, senior IP consultant. They had unequivocally done their homework. I reached for the pen. My signature was smooth, deliberate. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. Because this was not a mere transaction. This was a profound correction. I wasn't selling myself, nor was I selling revenge. I was giving my life's monumental work the future it profoundly deserved, far away from the incompetence and corrosive entitlement that had infected the house I once called home. There was no applause, no staged handshake photos. Just 2 quiet, respectful nods and a moment of stillness so vast it felt sacred. As I walked out, no part of me trembled. No part of me wished I had made them beg. I didn't need a courtroom. I didn't need a stage. I didn't need to scream that they were wrong, because Stravara would figure it out soon enough. They'd launch their bastardized version of Ravex and watch it catastrophically fail compatibility checks. They'd hit clause 11.3 and frantically call legal in a spiraling panic. They'd scramble through dusty filing cabinets and forgotten digital archives, desperately hunting for a name they had carelessly forgotten even existed. But I hadn't forgotten. I never stopped being her. Elena Hartwell. The woman who finished signing in 10 seconds and walked away with everything that truly mattered, quietly, completely, and entirely on her own terms. Sometimes liberation isn't loud. Sometimes it sounds like nothing at all. Just a pen gliding across paper and the immeasurable weight of 2 decades lifting from your chest like mist after a long, cleansing rain. The collapsed timeline. It began with a quiet, almost imperceptible tremor. No one noticed, at least not at first. At 7:42 a.m. on Wednesday, the prominent banner headline on Stravara's homepage vanished. It had proudly proclaimed, Ravex 3.0 expansion launching globally this quarter. By 7:43, it was gone. No announcement, no replacement, just a gaping empty space where the company's biggest brag had resided for weeks. I wasn't actively monitoring the site, but someone else was. By 8:13, a former colleague forwarded me a screenshot. No banner. No Ravex. The page now featured a recycled, generic product quote from 3 years ago. Beneath it, a single line of code in the source read, temporarily removed for internal review. The quiet panic had begun. By 9:06, an internal memo was discreetly leaked to a private industry Slack channel. Stravara's legal department had initiated a full, urgent audit of every single licensing agreement tied to the Ravex core. A stark red banner at the top screamed, urgent, executive-level review only. At 10:21, my phone vibrated with a text from a friend in finance. Just 5 words. You didn't tell them, did you? I didn't reply. By noon, the cracks had widened into fissures. The CEO called an emergency executive meeting. Board members were contacted directly, their terse, urgent voices ricocheting through the corporate hierarchy. And by 2:12 p.m., the cataclysmic blow landed. Hanley and Lauren Capital, Stravara's second-largest institutional investor, issued a notice of immediate withdrawal. Not a warning, not a request. An extraction. Over $84 million pulled in under 2 hours. Quietly. Coldly. It didn't make headlines yet, but within their opulent walls, I could almost feel the pressure drop like a sudden, violent altitude shift. People scrambled. Compliance teams frantically combed through ancient archives. Mid-level managers frantically dug up emails from 5, 10, 15 years ago, desperately trying to piece together when the ownership trail had so inexplicably slipped through their fingers. And then came the part that made me pause, a moment of profound, almost poetic justice. That evening, as I folded laundry with the news muted in the background, I received another message. This time, from someone I hadn't heard from in 8 years, Evelyn Shaw. Once Stravara's VP of Strategic Growth, she had famously declared at a conference that I was brilliant, but too old school to lead in this decade. Her message now was stark, devoid of pretense. Is it true the patent was never ours and that you still hold the core license? I sat down on the edge of the bed, rereading it once, then again. No anger. No apology. Just a raw question, born of fear, from the mouth of someone who had once so confidently labeled me obsolete. I didn't answer her either, because the answer was already playing out in real time. Ravex was untouchable. The platform was irrevocably locked. Clause 11.3 was ironclad. And every single investor with eyes and a calculator would soon realize that the undisputed crown jewel of Stravara's future was simply not theirs to sell. They fired me, believing I was disposable. But they never bothered to ask who was holding the very foundation. And now, they were watching the walls crack. One timestamp. One clause. One indelible signature at a time. Voicemail of panic. She used her old name? The file arrived in my inbox just after 7:15 p.m. An audio message, clandestinely forwarded from a burner Gmail address I didn't recognize. No subject line. No greeting. Just an attachment titled, Internal Exec Call Recording 7.12. I almost deleted it, thinking it spam. Then I saw the name in the metadata. Forwarded by J. Campbell. Jordan Campbell. A brilliant systems engineer I had mentored during his first year out of grad school. Quiet. Loyal. He had once asked me how to discreetly push back when upper management tried to appropriate credit for his work. I had taught him how to keep meticulous receipts. So, I clicked play. The recording was muffled at first, chairs scraping, someone adjusting their microphone, a distant, irritating feedback loop. But then, Asher's voice sliced through the static, loud, and unmistakably panicked. Wait, she used her maiden name? A beat of stunned silence. I thought we registered that IP under Brooks. Who? Who let that through? Who signed off on this? Another voice, lower, tighter, far less frantic, but laced with a chilling realization. The CEO. It wasn't our filing, Asher. It predates her employment contract. We only have secondary rights through the derivative license. Another pause. This one heavier, laden with the weight of unfolding disaster. So, we don't own Ravex? Asher again, barely concealing the incredulity, the dawning horror in his voice. Not the core system. Not without her signature. A long, collective exhale. Like someone had just realized they were holding a ticking bomb with no timer and no instructions. Then Asher again, louder. Shriller, bordering on hysteria. No one thought to check if she'd registered under her old name. Seriously, who the hell approved legal without updating her documents? And then, finally, silence. The profound, suffocating kind that doesn't arise from technical failure, but from a cataclysmic failure of fundamental understanding. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I simply stepped out onto my balcony, the twilight sky still streaked with the last vestiges of daylight, and pressed my phone to my chest. It felt almost as if its warmth might melt away the ache that used to reside there. In my other hand, a cup of jasmine tea, cool now, but still fragrant. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't gloating. It was something colder, more profound. Validation. They had tried to erase me in boardrooms, meticulously edited me out of pitch decks, referred to my foundational legacy in the past tense even as I still walked their hallowed halls. And now they were unraveling, not because I had struck back, but because they had never bothered to read the fine print next to the name they had so deliberately stopped saying. Elena Brooks. That's who they fired. But Elena Hartwell, she's the one they never saw coming. That signature was never for them. It was for me. For the systems I meticulously built. For the woman who stayed too long, gave too much, and finally remembered her own immeasurable worth. So I sipped my tea, let the cool breeze caress my face, and smiled. Not with victory, but with profound clarity. You can't fire what you never owned. And you can't bury a name that never needed your permission to truly live. The badge they forgot to print. The lights on the main stage dimmed, a hushed anticipation settling over the auditorium as the keynote panel was announced. I stood just behind the velvet curtain, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum, my heels firmly planted on the polished floor, listening to the resounding applause roll across the vast space. I had spoken at conferences before, many times. Back then, I still wore the company badge with a misplaced sense of pride, back when my work was introduced as part of a team effort and my name, if it was even mentioned at all, came second or third or often, not at all. But this time was profoundly different. A soft chime signaled the panel's introduction slide, and then the moderator's voice, clear and resonant, echoed into the hall. Joining us now is the visionary creator of one of the most resilient core systems in infrastructure AI today. Newly licensed to Betrayal Tech. Please extend a warm welcome to Elena Hartwell. The doors opened. I walked out, flanked by Verilia's lead engineers, two of them brilliant women I had once personally mentored, now rising into their own prominence at center stage. 4 seats awaited, each with a nameplate. When I reached mine, I paused for just a breath, a moment suspended in time. There it was, black ink on brushed steel. Elena Hartwell, creator of the Ravex core system. Not co-author, not advisor, not from the original team. Creator, not advisor, not from the original team. Creator. I took my seat, spine straight, chin lifted. The moment didn't call for pride. It called for peace. The ensuing discussion was sharp, layered, and resolutely forward-thinking. We spoke of the autonomy of code, ethical safeguards in AI, post-quantum security. I answered 2 questions with precise technical detail, one with unexpected warmth, and one about ownership and attribution, with a quiet stillness that made the entire crowd lean forward, captivated. After the session, a respectful line formed near the edge of the stage. Mostly engineers, mostly younger than me, eager to connect. But one in particular stood out, a young woman with oversized glasses and a press badge hanging crooked from her lanyard. When she finally reached me, she didn't offer a handshake. She simply whispered, her voice earnest, "They used to say you were just part of the team. But now I know you are the system itself." I didn't respond with words. I simply nodded, a slow, acknowledging gesture. Because she was right. They had fired Elena Brooks. They had forgotten Elena Hartwell. But systems, real systems, remember their foundational architect. And legacies, true legacies, do not vanish when someone removes your name from a badge. They rise when you do.